Alrighty guys, welcome back to the channel. We're doing another UFC breakdown this week. We've got Blaydes versus Derek Lewis. I'd just like to quickly say, before we get into it, had a real good response to the video last week, my most views yet on a analysis. So yeah, if you're back off the back of last week, we had a good week. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'm doing these for most events, trying to do them all for all events, and really kind of pick it up this year and try and build the fan base. So yeah, without further ado, quickly recapping last week, it was my best card of the year so far. We went 5 of 6 on tips and got a belt on verdict for finishing in the top 10%. For those of you who don't know, I do my predictions based on kind of the verdict app and the multipliers they provide. Verdict's an app that lets you kind of predict fights and score fights as they're happening. Very good way to interact and kind of tune into the fights with a little more precision, or look into them with a little more depth. So yeah, my worst call of the night last week was Rodolfo Vera to submit Anthony Hernandez. You know, it was a pretty horrible fight to watch. He has no tank on him at all, too much muscle, and you know, Hernandez just being the better striker, handy enough grappler to kind of lock up that choke when Rodolfo was just done, cut and deconditioned. Yeah, so as for my best call of the night, it was definitely Julian Marquez via submission. We got a monster XP collect with that. It closed at 20.48 times, but called it early on in the week at 29.02 times. You know, it didn't look like the safest of plays, but he does always chase the finish, and Patolo loves to get finished and provide opportunities for guys to find a way. So that was nice, especially as we had Julian Marquez at the money line, and also for him to win via finish in the betting section. As for the bets, other singles were the Jimmy Rivera money line, which was of course voided, and then the Gastelum knockout. You know, it never really looked likely. He didn't let the hands go as I thought he might, but he did fight really smartly to an easy decision. He needed that win. Yeah, he did enforce the grappling more than I thought, so I still think at $6 the Gastelum knockout was a bit of value, but obviously didn't go our way. And then that was the last leg of our multi as well, so lost the multi by that one selection. As the betting stood, we went up 1 unit in the single place section, but of course down 1 unit on the multi, so we broke even and stand this year, 2021, at a loss of 3.77 units, but still all-time profit of 42.769 units since I started doing these YouTube breakdowns. So on to the next. At the bottom of this verdict card, we've got Andrei Arlovski versus Tom Aspinall. Arlovski's 2.92 times and $3.05. Aspinall 1.52 times and $1.35. Andrei's been a really, really tough guy to pick recently. You know, results all over the shop. I picked him and I bet him as an underdog against Philippe Lins. But I also then thought Boza was going to pick him apart in his most recent fight, which was really close. You know, the stats say Boza by a landslide, but Andre just fought really sensibly, won a decision off landing, you know, the more damaging shots, and you can kind of trust him to fight like that nowadays. He likes to keep a distance and really slow things down, bring guys back to his level a bit, you know, because he's old, 42 years of age. You know, he doesn't have great movement anymore, and he can't afford to get himself into firefights like he once would have. But he still has two things that have been getting him over the line: his jab and his power. You know, the jab helps him manage range and, like I said, keep guys off of him so he doesn't get caught up in those wars. And that power that I feel he still has ensures that his opponents respect him enough that they don't just rush forward recklessly and get caught. You know, as a result as well, his fights of late have essentially all gone the distance. If you're looking through the resume, 10 of his last 11 fights have seen the cards, with the one exception being the loss to Jairzinho Rosenstrike in round 1. So, you know, on top of him fighting sensibly, a level of credit has to be given to his durability, especially this late on in his career. As for Tom Aspinall, you know, he's a young, big, dangerous heavyweight, burst onto the scene last year, scoring 2 first-round knockouts in his first 2 UFC fights. And I think he's worthy of being considered or titled as a hot prospect. He's really aggressive, has one-shot knockout power in pretty much every strike he throws, you know, and he just finishes fights. He's never been to a decision. As his resume stands, he does have 2 losses, but one was a DQ loss from 12 to 6 elbows, and the other was a submission back in 2015. I watched that fight. The submission loss wasn't great to see. His opponent Stuart Austin implemented a wrestling-heavy game plan there, managed to control Tom for some considerable parts of that fight. But the thing in this one is Arlovski doesn't offer a submission threat, and he doesn't really offer a wrestling threat either. Plus, Aspinall was only 22 years old way back in that loss. From what I've taken out of the tape, he's evolved so much since then. He's actually a great wrestler. I rate his takedowns, his double legs, his blast double legs. And then he has good BJJ as well. Only one career win via submission, but he's one gi and no gi BJJ tournaments in England as a brown belt. And, I think the way he manages to float on top of his opponent and transition between top positions is really impressive, especially at the weight class. As for Arlovski's recent opponents, I feel like his last two in Linz and Boza were sort of perfect stylistically for how he fights now. Neither of those guys are large frames for heavyweight. Neither of them really capable, or their style of bullying on the inside and managing to get inside of Andre, and neither of them really possessing big power to kind of match Andre in that department and test his chin, whereas Aspinall is both of those things. For him it is a big step up. That's a worry. Arlovski, a savvy veteran and has a massive experience advantage, and Tom's won all of his fights in the first round. If Andre can extend this fight as he has been able to do recently, will we see Tom slow down? Will we see him lose some belief? Very, very much a potential outcome. They're massive things. I don't know if Tom's conditioning is going to hold up. I genuinely have no idea. But those unknowns aren't enough to make me pick Arlovski. I like the knockout play. Andre's been TKO'd 11 times in his career, albeit none of those recently. But that is too short on verdict. It's 1.91 times for Aspinall to finish via strikes, which is not high enough, just based on kind of Andre's durability recently. So call me crazy, but I'm going to take Tom to win a decision here. He's a young guy entering his prime. He's very professional. I think his conditioning will be good enough to win that first round and then at least one of the other two. I think he's going to need some takedowns in order to kind of successfully win a decision. So if Andre's peeling him off early, I will be a little worried with this play. But it has been a while since Arlovski's fought anyone with serious wrestling ability. If you look through the resume, probably the last person he fought with wrestling chops was Imov in 2018. Before that, Tibura in 2017, and before that, Josh Barnett in 2016. And they're actually the only guys he has fought in the last 5 years that average a takedown or more per fight. So, and you look at those results, and Andre lost all three of those fights, and they weren't that close. He gave up 18 minutes, 35 seconds of ground control time across just those three fights, which is over a whole round per fight. And I honestly do think Tom has wrestling in that caliber, and surely he has conditioning as good as Marcin Tibura did in 2017 when he was as sloppy as ever. So fuck it. Tom Aspinall, a decision at 8.23 times. 12% of other verdict users are on that outcome. It's time to come to the testing ground for Tom. Is it too much too soon? Arlovski is a great litmus test, so we will find out come the weekend. Next fight along, Phil Hawes versus Nasruddin Imavov. Phil Hawes 1.46 times and $1.75. Nasruddin Imavov 3.18 times and $2.08. Just like our main event coming up, this is a rescheduled bout. These boys were meant to throw down on the first card of the year, the Holloway Cater number, but Phil Hawes withdrew late with an undisclosed injury. I don't know what that injury was, so it could play a factor here. It's only been a month, but it makes me feel like it can't have been too serious with him jumping right back in a few cards later. So, as to their skills, Phil Hawes is a big power puncher, and he has good wrestling, NCAA Division 1. His hands are pretty fast. He is a wild man on the feet though, winging shots, but he makes it work for him. He has some big leg kicks as well. His thighs are massive, but the big thing that he doesn't have is a gas tank. He's never won a fight when it's gone past 6 minutes, and we saw that in his loss to Julian Marquez on the Contender Series. He had a really good first round, landed some good shots, had some solid time in top control, pretty efficient working the ground and pound, but then essentially just blew the tank in that first frame and came out in the second and got rocked with literally whatever Julian threw. And his offensive wrestling went to shit as well. He was desperation takedowns and it wasn't happening for him. And we saw that Julian Marquez's defensive wrestling isn't much chop on last week's card when Maki Pitolo got the better of him until he didn't. Now, Nasruddin Imavov, his conditioning isn't elite by any means, but it's definitely better than Phillips. We've seen Imavov win a couple of decisions, and he showed us in his last fight, which was his UFC debut, that he still can maintain the striking output and grapple late into a third round. I like Imavov's striking. He's a pretty big, rangy middleweight. Phil Hawes has the range, or has the reach rather, but Imavov is the much taller man, and he has a good jab as well as being fast. He's got fast hands. I like his straight strikes. He's going to kick the legs as well, probably a little less than Philip Hawes, but it's still a skill that he does have. I also like Nasruddin's movement. With his range and dimensions, he likes to position himself on the outside and then kind of throw his straight strikes while slipping off to the side. He doesn't hang out in the pocket too long at all, which is going to be critical against a big power puncher like Phil Hawes. As for their wrestling, Imavov's isn't as good offensively, obviously, but as for his ground game, it is better. He's far more dangerous with his jiu-jitsu, whether that be from top position or from his back. We've seen him lock up an armbar before. As for his defensive wrestling, Jordan Williams couldn't get him down. That doesn't tell me too much, but whenever Jordan Williams was on the hips, he would look to lock up that guillotine or that das. He's very threatening, which could come a factor when Phil Hawes tries to go for those double legs with his head to the side. All in all, I think this fight does come down to that first round. Nasruddin can get hit. Jordan Williams rocked him a couple of fights in their fight, given one was a headbutt on the entry. But, if that's the case with someone like Jordan Williams being able to rock you, there is no doubt in my mind that Hawes can make him see stars. But Imavov did rally back from those shots, even the illegal one, evaded, found space, or shot in on the hips and tried to clear the cobwebs with some grappling. So, he is wise to it. He's got that kind of desperation IQ, and if it doesn't happen for Phil in the first 5 minutes, I'm pretty confident it won't happen for him. So, as a moderate favourite in Phil Hawes, his reliability as a play does not check out. I don't know, maybe this is more of a fade on Hawes from me. I'm not a massive fan. For those who watched my 2020 in-review video, I played Jacob Malkoon against him, and it was one of my worst calls of the year. So maybe I'm just still salty about that and I'm trying to get one back on him, but I faded him there for a reason. I think the record's padded. It doesn't show me too much regarding longevity and durability and conditioning. So I'm going to fade him again. If he wins this fight, I might have to start believing, but until then, it's going to be Nasruddin Imavov via second round knockout at 14.38 times. 6% of other verdict users are on the Imavov knockout, so not too many at this stage. As for a game plan, I think Imavov would be extremely wise to get some grappling going in the first round. Even if he ends up on the bottom and losing the round, just make Phil grapple, man. We saw last week with Rodolfo Vieira that if you extend these big, muscly guys early, they just can't keep up as the fight goes on. And then Imavov to finish him in the next. It could be a knockout, it could be a submission. Imavov is versatile like that. But there's marginally juicier odds with the knockout, so I'm happy with that call. Moving along, Alexia Olynyk versus Chris Dawkis. Olynyk 1.37 times on verdict, but the betting underdog at $2.47. Chris Dawkis, a moderate underdog on verdict, 3.69 times, but the betting favourite at $1.50. This is going to be the fight on this verdict card that I spend the least amount of time on, because it can literally only go one of two ways. Dawkis could come out, light Alexia up on the outside and sit him down, or Olynyk could secure a takedown and lock up his 47th pro submission. I think that's his record, 47. It's outrageous, right? It's kind of funny. This is similar to the bout that opened our verdict account this week, a heavyweight bout between an old veteran and a younger, much less experienced prospect. But the differences here are that I don't really think Dawkis is as good or as well-rounded as Tom Aspinall, and I feel like Olynyk does possess a much greater threat in this matchup than Arlovski does in his. Olynyk obviously has that submission area that if he gets to, he pretty much will finish the fight. Anyway, Dawkis, he does have some good striking. I like his aggression. I like his kicks. I also like his clinch game. As for Alexia, his striking's lacking, but it has been noticeably improving. And then I think his takedowns are actually pretty decent as well. And of course, his craftiness on the ground is elite. The way these odds match up, it's tough because I want to bet Alexia as the underdog. Dawkis was $2.80 in his last fight against Rodrigo Nascimento, and now he's $1.50 against Alexia Olynyk, a way more experienced and complete opponent. I get that he rolled Nascimento within a minute, but Rodrigo was also a submission guy, not the greatest stand-up, and I think he's being shown far too much respect at the bookies. As well as Dawkis has been sub before in his career. But on verdict, 3.69 times for a guy who is plenty capable of cracking an old and weathered Alexia Olynyk, who we've seen get hurt before and just roll over. The odds are too high. So, as I prefaced this breakdown, it's either the Olynyk sub, which verdict offering 1.76 times for, or the Dawkis knockout, which is 4.98 times. And those odds are all the describing I need to do. So it's going to be Chris Dawkis, round 1 knockout at 4.98 times. It's kind of a reluctant play, but it's the value play. 20% of other verdict users are also on the Dawkis knockout. As for a game plan in this one, Chris is going to need to come out aggressive. If he's too tentative with his shots, being wary of the takedown, I think that plays in Alexi's favour. And if Olynyk takes Chris down and immediately snatches his neck, I might just be crying on the couch. But have faith, these verdict odds are value, and that is reason enough sometimes. Next fight along, Charles Rosa versus Darrick Minner. Charles Rosa 1.22 times and $1.51. Darrick Minner 5.58 times and $2.44. This is also a pretty tough fight. I like Charles Rosa. I think he's the better fighter. I think he has a better rounded and more trustable skill set. But Darrick Minner is always live, especially as an underdog, and an underdog of this magnitude. He has a level of notoriety about his fast starts. He's got 22 wins in the first round. And, he is an absolute monster when it comes to hunting the neck. He has 22 submissions, 11 of which via guillotine. Guillotine monster. And, early on in fights, he's a wild man trying to get inside and implement his BJJ. He's not worried about pulling guard or any of that stuff that's usually not wise or looked down upon in MMA fights, because he has a great squeeze and he has faith off of his back even if the guillotine slips off. He has a really active guard, will chase arm bars or triangles. He does do it all. But after that first round, he doesn't typically fare too well, not too dissimilar to our friend Phil Hawes. Darrick Minner's only won 4 of his 36 professional fights when it's made it to a second round. So I think it is fair in assuming here that if Charles can avoid the early onslaught, he's going to win this fight. And honestly, I think he can. Charles does love to wrestle, and he's a great grappler in his own right. But I think he has the IQ and will have a tight game plan in this one to try and avoid the grappling exchanges, at least in that first round. As for his stand-up, he fights with a wide karate-based stance, has really good defensive footwork and lateral evasiveness, which is a massive factor here. Minner's going to try and pressure him forwards and get his hands on Charles, but I think Rosa is good enough on the back foot to keep circling away and keep Darrick chasing him. And, Rosa is the better striker. He kicks a lot, has pretty nice hands as well, will switch his stances up. The place where he's lacking on the feet is his head movement and, ability to dart in with attacks from the outside and then slip away. He tends to stay in the pocket a second or two too long. But Minner doesn't really have the power to punish him in there for that trait. So I think Rosa's obviously going to have the advantage on the feet. I think he's going to start real defensive, maybe even giving up the first round to octagon control and aggression, but then take over from there. Start to implement his wrestling when Minner becomes way less active, because his conditioning isn't really there like it is for Rosa. And let's be honest, even if Rosa does get put in some tricky spots in the first round or further, second, third round, his submission defense is elite. Bryce Mitchell did dominate him on the canvas, but he survived 15 minutes of relentless BJJ attacks to make it to a decision. however lopsided that decision may have been. He also went to a split decision with Yair Rodriguez a few years ago now. Was a really close fight, and he fought off a couple of tight submissions in that one too. And then Manny Bermudez two fights ago, Rosa was the first person to submit Manny Bermudez, a 14-2 fighter with 12 pro wins via submission, and a guy who was undefeated at featherweight. Rosa has some great wins and great wins against submission guys. I think he has the ability and the IQ to avoid and fight off Mina's submission threat early and then turn it on him to find his own finish late. Mina is not a durable guy. 10 of his 11 losses have been via finish. With Rosa, it's more likely that he finds a submission himself. He has 8 wins on the resume via submission and only 3 via knockout. But with the advantage he has on the feet and with Mina's only chance for a win coming on the ground, I'm going to play Charles Rosa via a knockout in the 3rd round at 14.05 times. 8% of verdict users are on the Rosa knockout. If you're going with Darrick Minner here, I think he is a little bit of a live play as an underdog, especially if you're choosing a first round submission, currently sitting at 22.66 times. I definitely considered the outcome for sure, but I think Rosa's the better fighter. Great submission defense, 0 losses on the resume via submission, and has the conditioning to turn this on as the fight plays out. The striking skills to compromise Darrick, whether that be to the legs, body or head, and find the finish later on. Alright, co-main event. Caitlyn Vera versus Jana Kunitskaya. Caitlyn Vera 1.55 times and $1.33. Jana Kunitskaya 2.81 times and $3.14. Alright, straight into it. Both of these girls are really big bantamweights, solid frames for the division. Both have come up against some pretty decent competition already and notched wins against good girls. I think they're both legit. Kunitskaya is the better striker. Both girls have kickboxing backgrounds, but Jana is smoother with it, simple as that. She kicks way more. For saying Vera does have a background in kickboxing, she actually rarely kicks. With that, Jana's going to have an advantage at distance, She will go to the legs a lot, has a nice teep kick to the body, and she's quicker, much quicker hands in fact. One of the only kind of attributes that I swing to Caitlyn on the feet is the power. She's very heavy-handed. And then strength in the clinch as well. And overall strength probably sides with Vera as well. This is an incredibly interesting matchup. Jana does like to work on the outside, but then will always look to clinch up in fights and bully smaller girls against the cage. Really beat them up with knees whilst either holding onto a high body lock or a similar grip. And it's impressive, the way she's imposed herself in those spots in her fights. But I don't think she can just do that to Caitlyn because, like I said, I think Vera is stronger than her, and she's a very, very big 135er. She's a black belt in judo as well. Her clinch game and power to reverse and get the dominant spot in the clinch is ridiculous. I seriously think Kunitskaya is going to struggle to control her there. And then her judo credentials also aid her takedown defense. Kunitskaya does look to wrestle offensively, but I highly doubt she gets Vera to the mat. I would be incredibly surprised if she does actually. And on the contrary, Kunitskaya's takedown defense is woeful, incredibly low. You shoot on Jana and you score. Shout out Thiago Santos. And I think Vera shouldn't have too many problems putting Jana on her back. And that is going to be the big factor in this fight that's going to swing it via the girl. If Caitlyn gets her takedowns as the styles, as the stats suggest she should, I think it's her fight to win or to lose. It's her fight. It's not like Kunitskaya is terrible on the ground. She does get dangerous from her back with arm bars and other submission attempts, but she's far too comfortable settling there. And I don't think she catches Vera sleeping on a submission. Vera is an incredibly well-credentialed BJJ black belt, never been submitted. I put Jana catching Caitlyn in a submission in the same realm of chance she has of securing a takedown, which is extremely low. So I don't think Jana will have success in the clinch, which is something she often relies on in her fights, and I think Vera can take her down and control her pretty well. So I have to go Vera, In saying that, if this goes to a decision, I expect it to be very close, perhaps even a split, because I think Jana's plenty capable of piecing Caitlyn up from distance. Her footwork, I'm speaking Caitlyn now, Caitlyn's footwork and her head movement's super average. So, rounds could be half Jana winning the striking and then half Caitlyn controlling her on the mat. And how the judge is going to score that, fuck knows, that's anyone's guess. So I suppose based on these odds and the fact that I think this is pretty close, Jana by a decision could be a sharp play. But I'm going to back this to actually not make it to the cards, and hence I've found a spot for Caitlyn that I do like. I like Vera to find a late submission. Like I said, this will find its way to the mat in favour of Caitlyn. I like her ground and pound. She's far more active with it now. She's previously lost top position due to inactivity on the ground. She's learned from that. And I think Jana's going to give up a spot for a submission. I could even see Vera dropping her on the feet if she gets in close and, scoring a club and sub. Kunitskaya is not durable by any means. 5 career losses, 2 being via knockout, 2 being via sub. So a Vera finish is not really a long shot by any means, but the odds we're getting suggest that it is. So Vera via round 3 submission at 12.41 times, 8% of verdict users are on the Caitlyn sub. So for her being such a favourite, pretty low percentage of predictors on that. So I'm happy with those double-digit odds for sure. Alright, main event now, Curtis Blaydes versus Derek Lewis. Curtis Blaydes 1.62 times and $1.20, massive betting favourite. Derek Lewis 2.62 times on verdict and $4.25 on the comeback. For those of you that don't know, this is a rebooking. Blaydes tested positive for COVID way back in November when they were originally slated to fight, but we finally get to see it happen again. On that occasion, I did break this fight down. Nothing's changed in my thinking. We know Curtis Blaydes is a phenomenal wrestler. He shoots with high volume, great accuracy, pretty much unstoppable once he has his hands clasped, and then has devastating ground and pound and top pressure. He has good conditioning to boot. He was exhausted in his fight against Volkov, but that was just due to the sheer volume in which he shot takedowns. 14 of 25. Interviews since, he's talked about neatening the grappling up a bit, or his attempts at least, in order to sustain his dominance across 25 minutes. And regardless of all that, he's going to be the fitter man. Lewis gets tired over a 15-minute striking match, let alone when wrestling's involved. As for the striking, Curtis has been making improvements. His defense is much better, both with his footwork and head movement. Plus, he has improved his kind of defensive hand positioning. He's always looking to parry. But Lewis is going to have the striking advantage. He has a great kickboxing game. And even though we saw Blaydes use the kick against Volkov in his last fight, he actually landed 28 leg kicks. Lewis is far smoother with utilising his kicks in combinations and coming forwards with his kicks, either finishing off the combination or starting to open up his hands. He's also faster. Blaydes can look sluggish somewhat at times on the feet, and Derek's obviously going to edge the raw power. That is the danger with Lewis, regardless of how much control time you have or how much of the fight you've been dominating or how fatigued he is, he does have that one-shot wild burst in him. But Curtis can take a shot, He has been TKO'd twice by Ngannou, but in neither of those fights was he out cold. Once the first occasion was a doctor's stoppage, and in the other stoppage, the lights were still on. It was a fair stoppage for sure, but it wasn't some brutal knockout like we know Francis for. One of my big reads in this fight and the big factors going forward is Derek's movement in fights, or at times lack thereof. He obviously looks good on the front foot, nice and light on his feet early in fights, but that only lasts so long. Once he becomes fatigued, he just gets walked down and just accepts that. He gets heavy on his legs, he shows no urgency, and he ends up against the cage in a squared stance, just shelling up. Kind of like Overeem in a way, but instead of defending and then evading like the Reem, when his opponent lets up, Lewis will kind of defend and then swing back. When that happens, when Lewis gets parallel against the cage, Curtis is just going to take the hips. He's not going to give Derek a chance to swing back at him, and it's going to be the easiest takedown you've ever seen. Curtis is one of the best wrestlers Derek has ever faced. It would be Curtis and DC, but Blaydes' top control is perhaps even better than DC's, and Lewis's technique of exploding to stand up is just not going to work. Derek's really struggled with the grappling game recently as well. He's been taken down in each of his last 3 fights. 3 times against Ivanov, 3 times against Latifi, and then even Olynyk landed one and controlled him on the mat. Was really close with the choke for a couple of minutes. And Lewis did win all of those fights, but those aren't good signs, especially considering how small Olynyk and Latifi are at 265. Latifi a light heavyweight, and Olynyk what weighs in at 230. Blaydes is so much stronger than those guys. So to my prediction, I'm taking Curtis Blaydes. It's the wise pick. His wrestling and pressure beats Derek's striking 9 times out of 10. Lewis relies on one big shot way too much to warrant picking him with any confidence, especially when he's going to be spending the majority of this fight on his back. As for a method, there is a solid chance that Blaydes wins the unanimous decision. But when Derek Lewis loses, he generally does via a finish. He's only lost twice in his career to decision. Most recently of those was way back in 2011. So I'm going to play a second round knockout in favour of Curtis Blaydes at 4.01 times. 24% of other viewers verdict predictors are on that outcome. Not second round specifically, just on the Blaydes knockout. It doesn't take long for Lewis to fatigue. That could realistically come as early as the second frame. I like Curtis to put a stamp on this one. Alright, let's quickly run over the betting outlook of this card. It's probably been my toughest card yet to find betting value. There's lots of really close matchups that I'm not willing to hang my hat on. Lots of underdogs as well that seem really inviting, but just not quite enough. And then likewise with some heavy favourites that I might be interested on putting a single play on, just not that confident. I wanted to play Chaz Skelly on the prelims, but he hasn't fought in a year and a half, and he really doesn't have the striking to compete with Jamal Emmers. Maybe later on in the week a submission prop will be a side play for me. They're yet to be released. I'll see the odds. If Chaz Skelly's paying $7 or more via submission, I may be tempted, but until then, I then also wanted to play Nate Landwehr. Kind of a fade on my half on Rosa's durability, as well as me really kind of favouring Nate's great takedown defence. All that experience in M1 facing Dagestani and Russian wrestlers will come into play here, plus his power. But that fight's going to be an all-out war, probably fight of the night. Either guy could probably get sat down. It's the way Nate fights, and I think I'll just rather sit back and enjoy that one. And then as for Arlovsky and Olynyk, both underdogs, I talked about both of those guys and those matchups. At the price, both are seemingly solid plays, but it could be one of those nights where we just see it changing the guard. They both kind of lose to younger, dangerous opponents. The one player I might be looking at on that is Aspinall. He's paying $19 to win a submission, so that could be an untracked side play for me, but wouldn't be hitting that with much confidence whatsoever. Arlovsky only subbed once in his career. I think that would be a huge feather in Aspinall's cap if he could, but yeah. So anyway, that's enough talk. The multi this week is just going to be a little throw together of fighters to finish their opponents who lack durability. So rattle it off. I'm taking Nasruddin Imov via finish, Caitlyn Vera via finish, and then Blaydes via a knockout at $20.43 on Sportsbet. I don't really need to talk about those legs any further than I have. They're all really self-explanatory. Obviously, all of those legs come with risk. The Blaydes leg being the shortest leg is probably the one I favour the most, but it is so short. So yeah, tough week for bets. As for singles, I'm just going to roll out with two. I'm taking Charles Rosa moneyline at $1.55 over on Ladbrokes, best price I can find. I think, like I've said, he's the much better fighter. Barring a Derek Minner Hail Mary submission round one, that's his fight to lose. And then I'm also playing a single play Charles Rosa to win via finish. Derek Minner, when he loses via finish. Rosa's got slick BJJ. He's also got the better hands. He's paying $2 over on Sportsbet. That was a leg I considered for the multi at $2, a little bit short for a multiplier, but I'm happy to just have a little wager here as a single play. That's all the bets this week, guys. As for heading into the future, stay close on the socials this week. They're all linked in the description, as I might drop another single play with lines changing. Chris Dawkis is getting a little fatter, actually. If he gets near the $1.70 mark, that may be enough to pull the trigger on him, especially as money's likely going to keep coming for Alexia with his submission threat. I think people are going to like that play. But as for now, there's nothing else. I'll see you guys next week for Rosenstrike versus Cyril Gahn, another heavyweight blockbuster. God, February, the month of heavyweight fights. If you've stayed this long, really appreciate it. Drop a comment, tell me what you're thinking, what your plays are. If you're on Verdict, give me a follow. That'll also be in the description. Like the vid. Other than that, I'll stop harassing you guys. See you next week. Cadger.